Hello, welcome back to Hidden Home Technology. Today we are discussing the Grimm MU2 with Jess here, who I have tortured with endless listen to this, listen to that for hours and hours to really get to know it and to get through it. So everything that I've spent now probably a year getting to know it, I've tried to highlight to her in a shorter space of time and then leave her to her own devices to get to know it herself sonically. So we will, as I said, review that. We will be comparing it to the Innuos Zenith Mark III with the Mola Tambaqui in terms of like its streaming capabilities. I've also had it with the Macintosh DA2, not this, but the Zenith Mark III. And then we'll go on to probably predominantly talk about it against the Innuos ZenNG with the USB out on the Phoenix upgrade card into the Mola Tambaqui. So what is the Grimm MU2? It's actually an awful lot more than I give it credit for most of the time, because I consistently use it just as a streamer into an integrated amp. But actually, it's a Roon server, Roon endpoint, streamer, DAC, preamp with an analog throughput, and an amazing relay-based volume control. So like the Griffin speak about in the other video, go watch our Griffin review. There's very little in the signal path in terms of the volume control, so that's incredibly good. It all fits in this tiny little box. And as I mentioned, it's got the analog throughput. That's important for use with a turntable, so your turntable does not get digitized at any stage. So all of that from one box. You could, in its simplest form, add a pair of something like active ATCs or active anything, and you would need nothing else for the actual hi-fi system in order to stream music and listen to that and accept your TV input on its digital inputs into its really, really special DAC. So Grimm Audio, a little bit of an overview of them. Basically, they come from a studio heritage. They have a deep understanding of the benefits of clocking and jitter. One of their most famous products is their clock that goes into studios to, as a master clock for the entire digital side of the studio. Yeah.
CC1.
That's it. Well done. I couldn't remember it, so I was deliberately skirting around the fact I wasn't giving a model number. And also, just as a little kind of like, cherry on top, they're absolutely lovely people. I've met Elko now at Munich. He gave me so much more time than he really needed to in such a busy environment, emailing me in the evening with unrelated things to Grimm products that had no benefit to him whatsoever. It's purely literally to help me with cinema acoustic design and things like that. So he's been incredibly good. And then subsequently as well, I've been in contact with him with Mal Fisher from AWE, who's the URC tech department, about integrating it into a control system. And Elko's just had more than a normal amount of time providing us with information.
Both great people.
Yeah, nice. And he's nice, not just helpful, but he's actually really nice and personable. So the MU2 overview, basically it is the streaming preamp, as I touched on, but what's it like to actually kind of use, what the practicalities. Basically, I found it incredibly simple, incredibly reliable. The menus within it are easy to navigate once you get used to the big old dial on the top and pressing it in. And the web interface, which is primarily how I've interacted with it. Again, everything you need, nothing you don't need. One of its most clever features I like is, in fact, it will learn an infrared remote in order to access most of its functions, skipping tracks, volume up and down, pausing, playing, changing input. And all you do is you go into the web user interface, you select the function you want it to learn. So, volume up, you press a button on any remote control and it will then assign that button to that function. So you can do volume up, down, play, pause, skip.
So if you've got it inside your unit,
Yeah, and that's the other quite clever thing. The IR receiver, the infrared receiver, the thing that, receives the actual command from your remote, is on a tail. So you can put this behind a box, behind a door. You can then just put your infrared receiver on top, and then point the remote at that. So it's on a little teardrop thing, and it will also fit underneath. So I normally have it out of sight under the front edge of the player, and it's so sensitive to receiving that I've never had a problem with, feeling like it's tucked away and out of sight. It's good. From a streaming perspective, it is Roon only at the moment, internally.
But we love Roon.
We do love Roon. I've got no problem with it being Roon only. And again, going back to the kind of touched on before with Grimm, they're great people. They don't stand still on their products, and they are working on, getting it super reliable with
fantastic team of engineers.
They are, aren't they? Yeah. They are working on making it UPnP compatible, so you can use, whatever streaming app on your phone, put the files, music, whatever in there, and then, away you go. So universal plug and play, that means. It also has their own in-house proprietary DAC technology. In other words, they're not buying DAC chips off the shelf and just implementing them really well. They're actually using a FPGA, a field programmable gate array, so a programmable bit of silicon in there, so they can write their own digital to analog conversion software and run it in there. And I do believe that is one of its, special elements. I mean, the MU1 proves that their transport side of things.
My initial appreciation, I think, for DACs came from the MU2, I think, when you're taking me through this journey.
Yeah.
I know we've always had the Mola Tambaqui as a reference point.
Yeah.
But when we first put the MU2 on, you could really hear the everything that they've been working on with the DAC, and the technology involved shines through clearly. Yeah,
it's something special when you've got a transparent enough system, or a system that would benefit from the, tonal signature of that DAC.
Yeah.
It's definitely the right tool for a job in a load of situations. So their own DAC technology. So sound quality, then this is, where I don't believe I'm alone with this one really in terms of my findings, but comparing it to the Zenith Mark III from Innuos with the Mola Tambaqui, so that's about a £15,000 combination plus cables, so call it maybe up to about £16,000 combination or something, in comparison to this box, which is I think £17,000 or £18,000.
Thereabouts.
If you're just using it as a streamer, that's relatively price comparable, but you do get more functionality with this if that's of use to you. There are plenty of situations where it is, but it just doesn't have to be. Like I said, I see it as a streamer in my context of my system, and it's not all of its other things it can do, although I'll come on to those in a minute. But sound quality, I think, compared to the Zenith Mark III with the Mola, this is way more kind of like... It makes instruments much more like sort of dense and tangible. So, it's not so wishy-washy watercolor. It's quite solid and three-dimensional, and feels like you can kind of, move your head and look round the instruments as they hang in space, or the vocalists as they hang in space. Yeah, it's great presence, clarity, but it's done in a really natural way. I once described it to somebody who was really interested before it's launched as if... if analog has a digital baby, it's got this kind of like tonal color that you associate with with like maybe even tape. Like I have this like rose tinted view of remembering an old cassette deck I used to have in a hi-fi system, and there's a analog quality of this that comes across in tape quite a bit.
Yeah. But they've always, Alco especially, that him and his engineers have strived for authenticity of the original recording, haven't they, to reproduce that as authentically as possible. Yeah. And that does come through, I think.
That does. And that statement can often come with like a negative connotation of like explicit detail. When people are sort of saying truth teller and things like that, it can often mean like, holds no prisoners, shows you everything, warts and all.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's guilty of that. No. I think it does it in a beautiful, very livable kind of way.
It's like bright without being harsh, and the lower end spectrum as well is controlled.
Yeah.
It's not overpowering, but there's a lot of tone to it as well, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's a sort of gets rid of your hi-fi-itis a little and stops you listening to what the hi-fi's doing and listening to more what the music's doing as well. I've got a note that says, it's more tonal color, more 3D, and instruments like hang in space convincingly. You know, they're there presented in the soundstage incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
And it was simply better than the Zenith Mark III and the Mola Tambaqui, which comparatively sounded bright, a bit splashy, a bit brittle in comparison, and lacked that mid-range tonal color. This does things like, I keep saying it's not repetitive to the camera, but it's repetitive behind the scenes. Things like the wood of cellos, the wood of a drum, the body in vocals, the
grunge of an amplifier.
Yeah, the grunge of an amplifier, an acoustic guitar string, you know,
husk
you can
of
hear,
a voice.
Husk of a voice, the thick strings versus the thin strings. That kind of, tonal color is just so, so rich in that it made the Tambaqui combo sound thin and
you're being a little harsh.
I am being harsh, but it's the reality of it. That
it was a wow moment for us, wasn't it?
It was a wow moment, and I could switch just simply, you know, this input or that input consistently, because you can group in Roon and you can have them playing simultaneously, and it's just a touch of a button to choose. And I never chose the Tambaqui with the Zenith Mark III, good as it is. In comparison, this is leagues ahead.
Mm-hmm.
It was the clear winner, and it was such a relief, like I said, from that like hi-fi-itis thing, just to have this beautiful music playing regardless of what it was I put in. But I will move on to the Innuos ZenNG, which is in the format I have, a kind of £10,000 streamer with then a £10,000 DAC. So a £20,000 combination. So more expensive than this by a few thousand, and also doesn't have the preamp functionality. Yes, you can use the Mola as a digital only preamp, you know, so it's got various inputs digitally and it has a volume control in it. So you could use it like that, but it doesn't have the analog throughput. The volume control isn't relay based.
Yeah, it's a very
in the same way. It's
product.
still a really good volume control and everything in the Tambaqui, but it isn't like this. And this preamp, when we used it with the Macintosh, bypassing the Macintosh preamp, clearly showed that it could do 3-dimensionality, layers, and that hanging in free space consistently without, you know, disappearing off when it wasn't the center of focus, a bit like the Griffin does, where lots of things hang tangibly in space simultaneously.
Clear soundstage again.
Yeah, the soundstage was just incredible. The ZenNG is more expensive and has less functionality when combined with the Tambaqui. Might not be functionality you need, but you know, in terms of what's being paid for in the, you know, what you buy out the box in terms of functions, there's more in this. But this is the big but. Again, having them both on 2 inputs on an amplifier, I was rarely choosing this over that combination, I have to be honest. I found that when you went to the ZenNG with the Tambaqui, the air and detail and grip, this is the ZenNG with the Phoenix reclocked USB out, and I'll come back to that again because I've skipped a bit, unfortunately. That was better than this. But if you used the ZenNG with the bog standard USB, and bog standard, that's dumbing it down, USB output, the standard, the one out of the box, no matter what, without the upgrade, USB output, this was better. Again, I wouldn't have chosen that.
Yeah, I remember that as well.
I wouldn't have chosen that input versus this one. But it's when you go to that jitter-free, which this is so good at, jitter-free. So you've got 2 jitter-free, I say jitter-free, very, very low jitter setups.
Low noise.
I have to confess to saying I prefer in my system the ZenNG with the Mola Tambaqui because of that. Yeah, it's the air, the details in the high frequencies, it's just greater detail levels in high frequencies. But this might still have more tonal colour.
There was definitely an emotive experience with the NG. Innuos upgrade, especially with the Phoenix USB. But when we go back to the MU2, I definitely have this, I do feel like I enjoy every time we go back to it.
Yeah.
There is a signature sound to it that is so nice. And where was I going with this?
Musical, I think, is probably that typical word for it, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you just enjoy the
ease of listening.
Yeah.
As Hans Beckhuizen, sorry if I pronounced his name incorrectly, but one of the key points he brings to the MU2 is that it never tires on the ear. The sound never gets dull. You can always go back to it and really enjoy the MU2.
Yeah, it sort of reads you of that upgrade-itis thing of like, you don't need more. If you're like a music first audiophile, and yeah, absolutely.
Great investment, I think.
It is an incredible, it is. And if you can use it in its simplest form as well.
When you're thinking about budget, an introductory sort of high-end hi-fi.
Yes.
I think it's a really good value for money product.
The form factor thing, touch on with like ideas or suggestions, using it with a pair of active ATCs, something like that, using it with a Mola power amp, either like the tiny little stereo perker, I think it's called, it's half the size of that again, that tucked away somewhere with a pair of speakers. I don't want to tuck
it away, actually. I think it's one of the nicer looking products you can get.
The power amp, you could stick the power amp somewhere, just tuck this tiny little shoebox power amp away, or even just have it next to it or whatever. Yeah. But you could, if you did want nothing on view or little on view, just have this so you can interact with the wheel, and then tuck your power amp away and a pair of whatever speakers suits your room.
That's very minimal,
It'd be
but
super
a very
minimal.
high-end.
Exactly, yeah. You're getting a kind of lifestyle system with hi-fi performance, like zero compromise. I think that's astonishing. Now, one other thing we've noticed is if you have a very transparent system and you are trying to extract the absolute most from this as a streamer, using a dedicated high quality offboard Roon Core has its benefits. There was a track, it was kind of a longer story really, but there was a track that I was listening to with one of the guys from Meridian when he came round, and I was showing him our reference system. We noticed with Jamie XX, I think it's called All You Children or All the Children, it has this kind of wobbly texture on top of the bass line when you use it without it being the Roon Core, when you use the offboard Roon Core, but when you use it as the Roon Core, that kind of detail on the extra layers of bass disappeared. It simply wasn't there. It was quite a night and day. It was a definitely on-off kind of thing. It was like it wasn't there and then it was there. It's like
it's hard to pick out. I think
it was a particular track that just showed that there is something happens when you use an offboard server that improves.
Slightly increased load on the MU2 if you're using the Roon server in it as well.
Yeah, I think I did ask or researched at least is that universal experience. A lot of the reviews say they don't notice a quality difference, but I wonder whether they're just using a not great quality offboard Roon server, like perhaps they're using their PC or Mac or whatever for running Roon there rather than a dedicated server. Because when you look at the Innuos range as just servers and not the streamer side, you get huge improvements in sound as you go up through their server side of things. So there's clearly a benefit to having an offboard server in principle. And I think it's shown in here that the cost of a Zenith Mark III at £5,000, chunk of money, but it does massively upgrade. Well, massively, it does noticeably upgrade this. So if
it warrants where the money is in the Innuos products if you're investing in that component of your system.
It's as much a positive to the Innuos as it is a downside to this, but it's definitely worth noting that if you want to extract the most from this and you have the budget left over after investing in this, then an offboard Roon Core,
that might be different though if
guide people.
We were putting it into the active speakers that it's intended for. That's not something
I still think it'd be a benefit you would reap if you had a server somewhere in the house. Yeah, and then this is the Roon endpoint. I think no matter what implementation of that, that's just an improvement. I mean, it's why the whole Innuos range exists, because there's improvements with better servers.
We've had that option though. Not everybody has that option.
No, exactly. But if you've got £20,000 to spend, buy this and an offboard Roon Core, and I think it will be better than if you didn't. And it's often hard to find a upgrade that falls under that kind of budget. When you've spent 20 grand on a streamer,
Right,
it's hard to find an
Fair
upgrade
enough.
for 4 grand because you've got to replace your streamer for £30,000 or something. So yeah, I think that's cool. And also actually the benefit of the Grimm with its tonal color thing, a slight shift down in the emphasis in the frequency range versus the area ZenNG Mola combo, is if you've got something like the Martin Parker Duo Diamonds that we had in for test the other day, they can benefit from a bit more tonal color in that mid-range, that lower mid-range upper bass thing, and this can offer that. So we haven't fully extensively tested the ZenNG Mola and this with that and the Griffin Diablo 333, so I will dig them out because they're in our stock room at the moment, so I'll go put them back in and probably try and confirm that over the next few days. But it's definitely true that if your system needs some tonal color, then this might be one of the best options out there, full stop.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll add colour for sure. No doubt about it.
I've got a card here that just basically says Jess's findings, Jess to speak. So I, a few days ago, charged Jess with picking a couple of songs that actually meant something to her and try not to analyse this from a hi-fi perspective, but to analyse it from an emotional perspective of playing songs on this versus playing it on the ZenNG Mola, and to give her findings on that. Really, it was meant for the Innuos review as much as for this, but I do want to hand you over to me not guiding the conversation and just take this somewhere where she thinks, to give a bit of balance to
my
opinions.
Only balance. It's so hard to really call a preference on either, because they're both really, really good, and I can only say thank you for the experience of the journey. It's been eye-opening, and I have a newfound appreciation for all of the different components within a hi-fi system. Starting from the Zenith and the Mola Tambaqui combination, I had such a wow moment when we brought the MU2 into your room. It was like, oh, wow, okay, I'm rehearing tracks again in a different way. And then exactly the same increase in wow factor when we brought in the NG. But like I said earlier, going back to the MU2, when we've had that luxury of the AB input 1, input 2, I enjoy going back to it every time. And although sometimes I find like I'm going back to input 1 more than input 2 with the NG, it's a fine line, and practically speaking, budget-wise, I would definitely recommend the MU2 every day. Yeah,
it's hard to argue with the value, the value of it if you can utilize every element of it. I think at that point, the value's actually quite off the charts for that amount of money to get a preamp that probably competes with many preamps in the sort of 5 to 10 grand category. To have a DAC that competes in the £10,000 category, to have a Roon Core, which, at that standard probably costs you a couple of grand with like a nucleus or something. And then to get, all of the other functionality, and to then get that tonal color, the quality of the clock in there, in that form factor. It's hard to argue with. It's really hard to argue with.
Also, I really love the company. Having learnt the history about it, that we've been following them a little bit more and getting more in-depth knowledge about the engineering and the components and the circuitry, you can really learn to appreciate, the differences between that and like Mola or Innuos, and see how it's, well, obviously we can't really say what's changing, making the differences in the audio, but we can hear the differences.
Yeah, we can hear the differences, and I haven't tested it yet with just sort of, finding a way to isolate the DAC element in there, like as in, I don't know, maybe getting a CD transport and putting it into the Mola and then putting it into this to see if things transpire that, the Mola always sounds like the Mola and this always sounds like it. But from what I understand from other reviewers that, they've been in the game a long time and they seemingly have pretty decent ears on them, That seems to be a fairly consistent remark, that whatever differences you hear in this as a streamer transpire to
we
to
definitely have had somewhat that experience, because we've had the MU2 now on the Griffin amplifier and the Macintosh amplifier, and
what I'm talking about though is like getting away from the like Roon rendering.
Yeah, okay.
And we're looking at it as a Roon renderer DAC.
Yes, yeah.
And looking at it as just a DAC for any offboard sources and things like that, like wiring your TV in, do you still get a Grimm sound out of it, or does it sound like the TV? What I've seen in other reviews is when somebody takes something like a CD transport, puts it into another DAC that they were comparing, a DAC streamer, I should say, that they were comparing this to as a streamer comparison, and then try to isolate the DAC from it, they find that the sonic signatures that they were talking about, or the descriptive words, apply when they're using the digital inputs on here as they do when they're using it as a streamer renderer.
Yeah, okay.
So in other words, the DAC has a sound that is agreeable. So everything they're saying about the benefits of it as a streamer over other streamers apply to it as a DAC over other DACs. So it has that tonal colour.
Well, I'm guessing it probably will, because both this and the Mola Tambaqui, they are coded by the engineers. They're not off-the-shelf chips, are they?
No, they're both FPGAs. Yeah, absolutely. One is Bruno Puzzi's version. This is Elko Grimm's. I think actually Bruno might have had something to do with, I don't think it was this, but it was the MU1, which is the transport side of this. So there's an element of like, I was going to do an episode at some point on the Mola and mentioning Bruno and who he is, and why I think it adds to the kind of pride of ownership of something like the Tambaqui. But I do think it he's had his effect on Grimm, I think, as well. But it's not to take away from Elko and Guido, the two guys that are Grimm. But I just think having
Tan, the whole lot.
Yeah,
they've done a lot of work.
Yeah. Grimm are a great company, and to have had Bruno in their midst at some point, I can't see it was ever a downside. But no, I think I'd love to do a more in-depth look at Grimm, maybe even get the MU1, because I know that the distributor here, he's a lovely guy, is keen for me to get the MU1, try it with the Mola, because that's meant to be a absolutely epic combination as well. Keen to try that. And also, to say like the MU1, which is the same form factor as this with a pair of LS ones, like the Grimm active speakers, would be a phenomenal little system. So sort of going off on a tangent now anyway. So in summary, it's compact and it's epic. That's the words I've got written down. And I've got a little caveat that if you want more from it still, Offboard Roon Core, if Roon is what you're using it for, as opposed to using the whole gamut of features of it. And then finally, if you could like, subscribe, comment about anything you want, feed the algorithm, that would be really, really appreciated. And goodbye. Thank you.